They say the dead don't sing, but every night at 3:33 a.m., something strange stirs deep in the mist-choked woods of Greywick Hollow. No buildings stand, no foundations remain. Yet beneath the bleeding moonlight, clear as day, you can hear it, a choir, singing, hymns that haven't been heard in over 100 years. The melodies rise and fall with ghostly elegance, notes echoing from a place where no walls exist, where no doors open, where no church has stood for generations. And those who dare to follow the sound, they never return the same. If they return at all, you can hear the church choir, but there's no church there. Is not just a story, it's a descent into a nightmare, woven through blood, betrayal, and ancient rites whispered through stained glass that no longer exists. 7 generations will unravel the mystery, each drenched in horror, thick with suspense, and pulsing with secrets that should have stayed buried. You'll meet new names: Elias Darrow, Marion Vale, Luther Kincaid, and more, each drawn into the ever-growing shadow of the choir's cursed song. And trust me, what you think is happening, you're wrong. Like horror that grips your spine and won't let go, then buckle up. If this intro gave you chills or left you with more questions than answers, what do you think the choir is really singing for? Who or what waits in the forest cloaked by voices of the dead? Comment below what you think is going on. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who loves a haunting tale, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Elias Darrow was a skeptic, a man of logic and a lawyer by trade. He believed in hard facts, in things that could be measured, touched, or explained. But that was before the whispering began. The first time Elias heard the choir, he was sitting on the porch of his cabin, overlooking the vast expanse of Greywick Hollow. It was early spring, a chill still hanging in the air, though the sun was starting to warm the earth. He'd just returned from a long day in town, a town that seemed to be slowly withering under the weight of its own history. The people there had an air about them, quiet, reserved, as if they all shared some ancient secret they weren't willing to share with outsiders. Elias didn't care. He was here for peace, a break from the noise and bustle of city life. He had bought the cabin on the outskirts of town, with plans to spend a year or so getting away from everything. His colleagues had warned him about Greywick Hollow, about the strange happenings and the rumors, but Elias wasn't one to indulge in superstition. After all, he didn't believe in ghosts. That night, as he settled into his chair with a drink in hand, he heard it. At first it was faint, barely audible, like a breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. Elias frowned, his gaze scanning the darkening woods surrounding his cabin. There was nothing there, no one. Then it came again, clearer this time. The unmistakable sound of a choir singing, voices harmonizing in a slow, haunting melody. It was beautiful, eerie, but it chilled him to the bone. Elias set his glass down, his heart beginning to race. He was no stranger to quiet, no stranger to the solitude of the country. But this was something else. The singing wasn't coming from the town. Elias knew that much. He'd spent enough time listening to the wind in the trees, the distant sounds of wildlife, to recognize when something was off. This was different. It came from deep within the forest, where the ground dipped into the darkened hollow that no one seemed to dare enter. Curiosity got the better of him, as it often did. He stood up, grabbed his flashlight, and made his way toward the edge of the wood. The wind had picked up now, the trees swaying, but the choir's song continued, undisturbed by the elements. Elias wasn't afraid. No, he was just intrigued. The further he walked, the more the air seemed to thicken, the melody growing louder, clearer. The trees here were gnarled, ancient things, their roots stretching deep into the earth, as if trying to hold the land together. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting strange shadows that twisted and danced on the forest floor. And then, suddenly, there was a break in the tree. Elias stepped through the underbrush and found himself standing in a small clearing. In the center of it was a massive stone foundation, cracked and weathered with age, the remnants of something long forgotten. His breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. There was no mistaking it now. A church, or at least what had once been a church. The stonework was old, much older than anything he had ever seen before. It was as if time had claimed it long ago, but something had kept it alive, hidden from view, tucked away in this forgotten corner of the world. The choir's song was louder now, filling the space around him, surrounding him with its haunting beauty. Elia's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't understand. How could there be a church here when the town had always spoken of this place as a mere legend? How had it remained hidden for so long? He stepped forward, his flashlight trembling in his hand, as the beam flickered across the remnants of the structure. The stone was cold, slick with moss, and he shuddered. The air here felt wrong. It felt like something had been waiting for him, watching him from the shadows. But before he could move closer to examine the foundation, something caught his attention. Movement. A figure. A woman. She stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of his flashlight, her long white dress flowing around her like mist. Her hair was dark, tangled in her face was obscured in shadow. The singing seemed to come from her lips never moving, but the sound so clear, so real, as if it was being breathed into the very air. "Who are you?" Elias called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The figure didn't respond. Instead, she began to move, gliding across the clearing, her feet barely touching the ground. Elias took a hesitant step forward, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The flashlight beam wavered in his hand as he strained to make out the details of her face. And then, she turned toward him. Her eyes, deep, black pits, seemed to draw him in, as if they were pulling something from the very core of his soul. The singing grew louder, now almost deafening, and Elias felt a pressure building in his chest, a weight so heavy, he could barely breathe. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. Elias stumbled backward, his heart racing. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. The woman's gaze held him captive, her eyes never leaving. And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The choir's song ceased. The clearing fell silent. Elias stood frozen in place, the forest around him eerily still. His breath came in short gasps, his body trembling. He didn't know what he had just witnessed, whether it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. All he knew was that he had stumbled upon something that had been hidden away for far too long. With shaky legs, he turned and hurried back toward his cabin, his mind racing with questions, none of them making sense. What had he seen? What was that woman? What had she meant when she said, "You don't belong here"? The answers were just out of reach. But Elias knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be the same after tonight. Marion Vale didn't believe in ghosts, but she couldn't deny the strange things that had started happening around her. Ever since her brother, Elias Darrow, returned from Greywick Hollow, he'd been different, quiet, withdrawn, eyes always darting toward corners of rooms as if searching for something. He no longer spoke of the church, but Marion could feel the weight of it in his silences. It had been a few months since that night when Elias first told her about the choir, the woman in the white dress, and the forgotten church in the woods. At first, Marion thought he had simply imagined it, a product of his overactive mind, or perhaps the isolation of living alone in that cabin. But Elias had always been grounded, logical. Something had happened to him in that hollow. He wouldn't talk about it, but Marion could see the haunted look in his eyes whenever the subject came up. And now something was happening to her. At first it was small thing, a sound in the night, the faintest of whispers, just beyond the edge of her hearing. At first she chalked it up to stress, the anxiety that had crept in after Elias's return. But as the days passed, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. One evening, as the wind howled outside her home in the town of Greywick, Marion was sitting at her desk, writing a letter to a friend in another town, when she heard it, a faint haunting melody, so soft she thought she might be imagining it. Her pen froze in midair, as the notes seemed to seep into her thoughts, into her very bones. It was the same song Elias had described to her, the same song that had unsettled him so deeply. The hair on the back of her neck prickled, and for a moment she thought about ignoring it, about going back to her work and pretending nothing was wrong. But the song, it wasn't a song anymore. It was a call. Marion stood up from her chair, her hand shaking as she reached for the door. The whispers grew louder now, as if urging her to follow them. They seemed to come from the woods. They seemed to come from somewhere deep, somewhere far older than the town itself. She stepped outside into the cold night air, her breath forming clouds in the moonlight. The town was quiet save for the occasional creak of old houses settling, but in the distance the melody drifted toward her, as if the very earth was humming it beneath her feet. Marian's heart raced as she made her way toward the woods, her footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The trees were twisted here, ancient and bent under the weight of time, their limbs reaching toward the sky like the hands of forgotten ghosts. The further she walked, the louder the choir became, until it seemed to fill the very air around her. The sound was mesmerizing, hypnotic. It pulled her deeper into the darkness, and the forest seemed to shift, to close in around her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the underbrush, the sound of her footfalls drowned out by the choir's haunting melody. Then she saw it, a clearing, in the center, the remains of the church. It looked exactly as Elias had described it, ancient, overgrown with moss and vines, the stone cracked and crumbling under centuries of neglect. And in the center of it all, a figure stood, the woman in white. Marian stopped dead in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure didn't move, but Marian could feel her eyes on her, even from this distance. The singing grew louder, drowning out all other sounds, until it was the only thing that existed in the world. Marian didn't know what she was doing, or why she was drawn to the church, but something deep inside her told her she needed to be here. She needed to understand. She stepped forward, her legs moving of their own accord, drawing her closer to the woman. The air around her was thick, almost suffocating. The song wrapped around her like a chain, pulling her in. As she neared the figure, the woman turned slowly, her pale face now visible in the moonlight. Her eyes were black, endless voids that seemed to draw Marian in, just like they had done to Elias. "You've come," the woman said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but carrying the weight of 1,000 voices. Marian opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The song continued, swirling around her, filling her mind with visions of something ancient, something that had been waiting for so long. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said again, and this time her voice was sharper, colder. Marian felt a chill grip her heart as the woman stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground. The shadows around her seemed to deepen, twisting in unnatural patterns. The choir's song grew louder, so loud that Marian thought her ears might bleed. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it did no good. The melody seeped into her soul, and for a moment she thought she might lose herself entirely to it. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the smile of something far older than Marian could comprehend. The woman stepped closer, and Marian felt her body freeze, her muscles locked in place. "You are one of them now," the woman said, her voice low and filled with an unsettling glee. "Just like your brother, just like the others." Marian opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. The darkness around her closed in, the song growing louder and louder, until it consumed everything. And then nothing. When Marian opened her eyes, she was no longer in the clearing. She was back in her home, lying on the floor, gasping for air. The sun was rising, and the world outside was quiet once more. But the memories of the night, of the woman in white, of the choir's song, of the terrible truth she had glimpsed, remained, lodged deep within her mind like a seed that had taken root. She wasn't sure how long she had been gone, or whether what she had experienced was real or a dream. But one thing was certain. The song would call her again. Luther Kincaid had never believed in ghosts either, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He was a man of science, a historian by trade, and it was in his nature to seek logical explanations for everything. That's why when Marian Vale, Elias Darrow's younger sister, came to him with her story, he didn't dismiss it outright, though he wanted to. He needed to understand what was happening to her, to figure out what was really going on in Greywick Hollow. Luther had never known much about the Darrows or the Vale family before, but when he heard about the strange occurrences surrounding them, he couldn't resist the pull to investigate. There was something about Marian's words, her haunted expression, that made him want to believe at least just enough to put his mind at ease. After all, Greywick Hollow was steeped in history, and Luther had studied enough folklore and old myths to know that these kinds of things often had rational explanations, no matter how outlandish they might sound at first. He had asked Marian to meet him in the town's small, dusty library the next day. She had agreed, though her expression betrayed her fear. As he sat across from her, watching her twirl a pen between her fingers, Luther couldn't help but notice how much she had changed since Elias had gone missing. He had disappeared some months ago, his last letter to Marion filled with cryptic warnings that only seemed to further her unease. "Luther, I don't know how to explain it," Marion said, her voice trembling as she looked down at the table between them. It's happening again. The song, the woman, the church." Luther watched her, a deep frown creasing his brow. He had read about this phenomenon in various texts, but none of them were quite like this. No, this felt different, darker. The song Marion described, Elias too, wasn't like any folk tune or sound that could be easily explained by the wind or echoes in the forest. It was something that had burrowed deep inside of them, something alive, something waiting. "You're not crazy, Marion," he said, his voice firm, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed his own words. "Tell me everything, don't leave out a single detail." For hours, Marion spoke, recounting the chilling events that had led her to the clearing, her encounter with the woman in white, the unshakable grip the song had on her soul. As she spoke, Luther felt a rising sense of dread coil in his gut. It wasn't just an old myth. It wasn't something easily explained away. No, this was something that had been waiting for centuries. When she finished, Luther didn't know what to say. There was nothing logical about what she had described, no clear explanation. He stood up from the table, pacing as he ran his fingers through his hair. His mind raced, searching for answers, but there were none to be found. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he turned back to Marion. "You said Elias was different when he came back from the hollow, right?" Luther asked, his voice low, "that he wouldn't talk about what happened there. You think it's the same thing that happened to him?" Marion nodded, her face pale. "He doesn't talk about it, Luther. He won't even look at me when I mention it. He's scared. And I don't know why." Luther felt the weight of her words settle on his chest. There was something terrible happening in Greywick Hollow, something ancient and dangerous. But what could it be? What was this force that seemed to haunt the place? There was only one way to find out. "I'm going there," Luther said, his voice suddenly decisive. Marion's eyes widened in fear. "No, Luther, don't. You don't know what you're dealing with. It's not just some story, it's real. Elias almost didn't come back. He changed after that night." Luther ignored her protest, already gathering his things. "I'm not going to be scared by some old tale, Marion. I'll figure this out. You have my word." With that he left the library, his mind made up. The night Luther arrived at Greywick Hollow, the air was thick with mist. The town was quiet, its buildings almost entirely dark, save for a few faint lights in the distance. It was colder than he remembered it, and he pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, trying to shake off the chill that had settled deep into his bones. The woods that bordered the town were even more unnerving at night. The trees seemed to lean in toward him, their branches twisted like gnarled fingers reaching out to grab him. The closer he got to the forest's edge, the more the hairs on his neck stood on end. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the longer he stood there, the harder it became to dismiss the dread creeping into his chest. The song started up again. At first it was a whisper, carried on the wind, a faint, almost melodic hum. But as Luther stepped deeper into the forest, it became louder, clearer, like a chorus of voices calling out to him from somewhere far deeper in the woods. His heart began to race as he followed the sound, his steps quickening despite the growing unease gnawing at him. Luther reached the clearing just as the full force of the choir's hymn washed over him. The stone foundation of the church was now visible, and his breath caught in his throat as he saw the crumbled remnants of what had once been a magnificent structure. The smell of old stone and damp earth filled the air, and there, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the woman in white. Her face was shrouded in shadow, but Luther could feel her eyes on him. The song seemed to swell around him, growing louder, until it felt as if the very earth was singing. The woman's lips didn't move, but her voice echoed inside his mind. "You shouldn't be here," she said, the words chilling in their quiet command. "You don't belong." Luther's pulse raced as he tried to steady his breathing. "What is this? What's happening here?" The woman didn't answer. Instead she raised one hand, pointing toward the center of the ruins. Luther followed her gaze and his heart stopped. There in the center of the broken foundation, something was rising from the earth, something that had been buried long ago. A shape, a figure, and it was coming for him. Luther Kincaid couldn't move. His feet were rooted to the ground, his body frozen by the sheer terror that gripped him. The woman in white, her shadowed face now more visible in the dim light of the moon, was watching him with cold, unblinking eyes. The choir's haunting melody wrapped around him, thick and suffocating, its rhythm quickening as the shape began to emerge from the crumbled foundation. The earth groaned as though protesting the intrusion, and a terrible cracking sound reverberated through the clearing. The figure rising from the ground was tall, far taller than any man. It was covered in dirt, but its features were unmistakable. A large, blackened figure, its arms stretching impossibly long, its head barely visible beneath a tattered hood. Luther's breath caught in his throat. The creature wasn't human. There was something deeply wrong about it, something that defied everything he thought he knew about the world. It was a nightmare made flesh, its body seemingly made of stone and shadow, like it had been carved from the earth itself. He stumbled back, but his legs felt heavy, weighed down by some invisible force. The woman in white raised a hand, and the figure paused, its hollow eyes glinting in the darkness. "Leave now," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of an ancient warning. "Before it's too late." Luther could barely process her words. The singing grew louder, the sound of hundreds, thousands of voices joining in the chorus. It was as if the very earth was vibrating with the song, resonating with a power that pulled at his very soul. He wanted to scream, to run, but some force held him in place. The shadowed figure began to move again, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. Its massive feet cracked the earth with every step. It was heading directly for him. Luther finally found his legs, and he turned, running through the forest with all his strength. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just witnessed, but the terror of the moment clouded his thought. Every instinct screamed for him to get away, to escape the malevolent force rising in the hollow. But the song followed him, weaving in and out of his thoughts, like an inescapable trap. No matter how fast he ran, no matter how deep he plunged into the woods, the music never stopped. It clung to him, surrounding him, until he couldn't tell where the music ended and his thoughts began. Finally, his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The forest was silent for a moment, eerily still, and Luther could feel his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. That was when the ground beneath him began to shift. At first, it was a tremor, so slight he thought it was just his imagination. But then it grew stronger, and the earth itself seemed to buckle. He looked up, eyes wide with disbelief, as he saw the stone foundation of the church moving, reshaping as if it were being lifted by some unseen force. A voice called out to him, a whisper soft and familiar. Luther's breath caught in his throat as he realized who it was. "Elias," he muttered, his voice shaking. It's you, isn't it?" The figure in the clearing, now fully formed, looked down at him, and Luther could see it more clearly now. It was no longer just a dark shape. Elias' face, pale, gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking, stared down at him. He was no longer the brother Marion had known, the man who had left so full of life. This was something else, something hollow and empty, a vessel for whatever evil had awakened in the hollow. The choir's song intensified, its voices now a cacophony of whispers and wails, filling Luther's mind with visions of horrors he couldn't understand. He saw flashes of men and women, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies sprawled out in front of a great altar. He saw flames, shadows, and something worse, something ancient. Elias' mouth opened, but it wasn't his voice that came out. The voices of hundreds, thousands, spilled forth in a strange, guttural language that Luther couldn't comprehend. His mind screamed for release, but his body refused to obey. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The woods fell silent. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and Luther could breathe again. His limbs shook, and his mind felt like it was on the brink of shattering. He wanted to run, but his body refused to move. He could only stare at the figure that had once been his friend, his brother in arms, his confidant. Elias, or what was left of him, reached out a hand toward him. His fingers were cracked, his skin ashen, but there was a faint gleam in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. "You have to leave," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. "Before it consumes you, before it." But before he could finish his warning, the woman in white stepped forward. Her presence was enough to stop Luther's heart in his chest. She was no longer just a figure in the shadows. She was something far more powerful, her form shimmering, her face twisted in a grotesque mockery of beauty. "You've seen too much," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Now you are bound to us, like all who come here." Luther's stomach churned as the world around him began to blur. The ground beneath him shifted, becoming softer, wetter, like the very earth was swallowing him whole. He struggled to stand, but his legs were unresponsive. The shadowy figure of Elias reached out, but the woman in white stopped him with a wave of her hand. "No, he is ours now." The ground rumbled again, and suddenly the clearing seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The woman's voice grew louder, now almost deafening, as Luther's mind fought to comprehend what was happening. His vision grew dim, his breath shallow. He could no longer tell where the church ended and the forest began. It was all one dark, suffocating mass, wrapping itself around him, tightening like a noose. He saw in the distance the remnants of the church, its towering spires rising from the earth like a monument to some long-forgotten god. The choir's song was no longer distant. It was inside him now, pulsing with his heartbeat, filling him with an ancient hunger, an unholy need to join the voices. "You are one of us," the woman in white whispered again, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You will never leave." And with that, Luther Kincaid's world went dark. Sophia Kincaid had heard the stories. Everyone in Greywick Hollow had heard the rumors about the strange happenings in the woods, about the eerie choir and the ancient, crumbling church that no one dared to visit. But Sophia was different. She didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural forces. She was a skeptic, a journalist who made a living writing about myths and legends, unraveling their truths with the sharp eye of a rational mind. That's why when she heard about her cousin Luther's disappearance, she didn't just sit idly by. She had to know what happened to him. Luther had vanished without a trace, and though the town had whispered about it, no one had ventured into the hollow to seek the truth. Everyone was too scared, too afraid of what had happened to those who had gone before. But not Sophia. She was determined to find out what had happened to him, even if it meant confronting the terrifying legends that had haunted Greywick for centuries. Sophia arrived in Greywick Hollow one chilly autumn afternoon, her boots crunching over the dry, dead leaves that littered the town's street. The people watched her with wary eyes as she passed, their whispers quiet, but persistent. They knew what she was here for. They knew she was going to uncover the secrets they had worked so hard to bury. She went first to Marion Vale's house. Marion had been Luther's closest confidant, and from the way the townspeople spoke of her, it was clear that Marion had been affected deeply by her brother's disappearance. Sophia knocked on the door, and when Marion answered, her face was pale, drawn as if she hadn't slept in weeks. "I'm here to find Luther," Sophia said, her voice firm but kind. "I need to know what happened to him." Marion stepped aside, letting Sophia in. As they sat down at the kitchen table, Marion's eyes darted nervously around the room as if she were afraid that something would emerge from the walls themselves. "I wish I could tell you something, Sophia," Marion said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know what happened to him. He just disappeared. I've been to the hollow. I've heard the choir, the woman in white. But I never went as deep as he did. Luther, he knew something. He saw something." Sophia frowned, the mystery growing even darker. She had read about the strange disappearances in the hollow, the chilling accounts of people who went in and never came back. But the idea that Luther had somehow seen something so terrifying that it had taken him, was unsettling. "What do you mean he saw something?" Sophia pressed. Marion hesitated before answering, as if reluctant to speak the words aloud. "He saw them. He saw the choir. He saw the woman. The figures that have haunted the hollow for centuries. Sophia's heart raced. This was it. This was what she had come here for. The truth. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to uncover what lay beneath the surface. "And you think they took him?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking. Marion nodded. "I don't know, but when I went there, when I heard the song, I knew I couldn't stay. The song, it calls to you. It doesn't just take your body. It takes something far worse. It takes your soul." The words chilled Sophia to the core. She had heard the stories, but to hear Marion speak them so earnestly, so desperately, made them feel all too real. Sophia stood up abruptly. "I'm going to the hollow." Marion's face paled even further. "No, you don't understand. You're not just going to the woods. You're walking into a place where time and space don't work the way they should. The hollow. It's not just a forest. It's a prison. And it's waiting for you." Sophia locked eyes with Marion. "I'll take my chances." Without waiting for a response, she turned and left the house, heading toward the edge of the hollow. The sky above was darkening, and the wind had begun to pick up, making the trees groan in the distance. She didn't know what awaited her in those woods, but she couldn't back down now. Luther was out there, somewhere, and she had to find him. As she ventured deeper into the hollow, the sounds of the world around her seemed to vanish. The rustling of the wind, the distant calls of birds, the chirping of insects, all of it faded, leaving only a deep, suffocating silence. Her breath became shallow, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She was not alone. Then the song began. At first it was faint, a whisper on the wind. But as she moved further, it grew louder, its eerie melody sinking deep into her bones. It was like the very air around her had become saturated with it. The sound pulled at her, a soft, hypnotic pull that she couldn't resist. Sophia stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to fight the urge to turn back, to run away from whatever was out there. But she couldn't. She had to know what happened to Luther. She had to know the truth. The path ahead seemed to open up, revealing a clearing. In the center of the clearing, a crumbling stone foundation rose from the earth, like the remnants of a forgotten cathedral. The stone was dark, slick with moss and age, and standing in the center of it all was a figure, a woman in white. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had heard about the woman in white, the spirit that haunted these woods, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of her. The woman was tall, her long hair flowing like a river of silver, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The air around her was thick with a sense of power, of something ancient and unfathomable. And behind her a shape moved, a shadow, something huge, looming. Sophia felt the ground beneath her tremble as the figure stepped forward, its footsteps making a hollow, bone-chilling sound. It was him, Luther. His body was twisted, his eyes hollow and dark, his skin pale and cracked like old stone. He didn't speak. He didn't move except to step forward, drawn to the woman in white, like a puppet on a string. Sophia's heart twisted in her chest. This was not the man she had known. This was something else, something terrifying. "You've come for him," the woman in white said, her voice soft but filled with ancient authority. Sophia tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat. The choir's song had grown louder, filling her mind with 1,000 voices, all speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The shadows around her seemed to grow longer, wrapping themselves around her like tendrils of darkness. "You cannot leave," the woman whispered, her voice cold as ice. "You are bound to the hollow now, just as they all were." Sophia's vision blurred as the darkness began to close in. The song filled every corner of her mind, and the last thing she saw was Luther's face, his empty, lifeless eyes staring back at her. Then nothing. Marion Vale's heart had been heavy since Sophia Kincaid had vanished. Her cousin had ventured into the hollow in search of answers, just as Luther had, and just like him, she never returned. It wasn't as though Marion hadn't expected it after all. The hollow had claimed so many before, but this time it was different. This time it felt personal. Sophia had been the last tie to her brother that Marion hadn't been able to sever, the last person who might have brought him back, If only she hadn't followed in his footsteps. Now Marion stood at the edge of the same clearing, her eyes scanning the shadows of the forest with a mixture of dread and determination. She had to face the truth. She had to do what her brother Elias couldn't. For months, she'd been terrified of the hollow, of its dark pull, of the haunting song that no one could escape. But now, as the wind whispered through the trees and the song began to drift through the air, Marion could feel the weight of inevitability settle over her like a blanket. It had always been this way, and it would always be this way. And if she was to save the souls of those she loved, including Elias and Sophia, she had to step into the hollow. She had to confront whatever it was that lay at the heart of the song, the woman in white, and the horrible suffocating power that bound the souls of the lost to the land. Marion walked forward, her boots crunching over the dry leaves that coated the path, each step echoing in the silence that seemed to press in from all sides. The familiar sensation of being watched crept over her, the feeling that unseen eyes were following her every move, waiting for her to stumble or falter. But Marion didn't falter. She couldn't. Not now. The song grew louder with every step she took, a beautiful and terrifying melody that seemed to snake through her veins. She could feel it, the pull, the compulsion to follow, to surrender to the song's haunting beauty. It made her skin crawl, and yet, at the same time, it soothed something deep inside her. The hollow was calling her. It had been calling for so long, and now she would answer. As Marion reached the clearing, she could see it, the crumbled remains of the church, its stones weathered and broken, as if the earth itself had swallowed its foundations whole. The air in the clearing was thick, oppressive, and heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay. And standing at the center of it all was the woman in white. Her silhouette was barely visible in the pale moonlight, her figure glowing like a spectral beacon. Her hair was long and flowing, her dress shimmering with an otherworldly radiance, and her eyes were dark, deep wells that seemed to reach into the very core of Marion's soul. "You came," the woman said, her voice a soft murmur that somehow resonated deep within Marion's chest, like the pulse of a heartbeat in the dark. "I have been waiting." The words filled Marion with a cold sense of dread, but she forced herself to approach, the pull of the woman's gaze nearly too strong to resist. "I came for them," Marion said, her voice wavering but determined. "My brother, my cousin, they're lost. I want to bring them back." The woman in white tilted her head as if considering Marion's words carefully. "They were never truly lost. They simply belong to us now, as you will soon understand." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath Marion's feet, and the earth groaned with a deep guttural sound. From the depths of the broken church foundation, a figure began to rise. It was tall, twisted, and impossibly large, its body obscured by shadows. The very earth seemed to open up beneath it, and it stepped into the clearing like a giant walking from the bowels of the earth itself. The figure's face was hidden beneath a dark hood, but its presence was enough to make Marion's heart race. She knew this figure. It was the same one she had seen in her dreams, the one that had haunted her thoughts and nightmares since her brother had disappeared. "Alive," Marion whispered, her breath catching in her throat, but the figure did not respond. Instead, it stepped toward her, its movements slow but purposeful, and as it approached, Marion could hear a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to come from the very air around her. "You should not have come." It was Elias's voice, but distorted, twisted. His words were filled with sorrow, with desperation. She reached out toward him, her hands trembling, but before she could touch him, the figure raised its hand, and she felt an invisible force slam into her chest, pushing her back. The woman in white stepped forward, her face still obscured by shadows. "You cannot bring them back, Marion. The hollow does not release its captives." Marion struggled to stand, but her body felt heavy, as though the earth itself was trying to swallow her whole. The song had grown louder, its voices blending together into an inescapable cacophony. It was as if every part of the hollow was alive, singing in harmony, pulling at her mind and her soul. "You must understand," the woman continued, her voice barely audible above the music. "They belong to the hollow now, and soon you will too." The shadows surrounding her began to shift, twisting and contorting, becoming living shapes, like dark tendrils reaching out for her. Her body was drawn forward, her feet moving as if they were no longer her own, following the pull of the song, following the inevitable draw of the hollow's power. She tried to resist, but the pull was too strong. She could feel herself slipping away, her thoughts becoming more distant with every step. And then, just as it seemed that she would be swallowed whole by the dark force surrounding her, a voice, Luther's voice, called out to her, "Marion." She turned, her heart racing in her chest. There in the shadows was Luther. His form was faint, almost translucent, but his eyes were clear, filled with something like recognition. "Luther?" Marion gasped, reaching out toward him, but he shook his head, his lips moving in a silent warning. "You can't save me, Marion." The woman in white stepped forward, her cold, ghostly hand resting lightly on Marion's shoulder. "He is right, it is already too late." Marion turned back to face the hollow, the figure of Elias still looming over her. She felt a deep, gnawing pain in her chest, the weight of loss, of helplessness, settling in. The song grew louder, overwhelming her, drowning out everything. The ground beneath her feet began to shift, pulling her into its grasp. She could feel the earth closing around her legs, her arms, until she was completely submerged. And as the song swallowed her whole, she understood. The hollow didn't just take bodies, it took souls. It wasn't over, not yet. As the earth swallowed Marion, the last remnants of her being were slowly drawn into the hollow, consumed by its unrelenting force. But the end was not yet complete. The song, the cursed melody, echoed in her mind, a symphony of agony that pulsed through her very bones. There was no escape. The hollow had her now, and there, within its dark, insatiable heart, the truth was revealed. The hollow had always existed. It had been waiting for those like Marion, like Luther, like Sophia, and all the others who had come before them. It had existed long before they had set foot in the woods, long before Greywick Hollow had ever been a settlement. It was an ancient thing, older than the stars, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, where souls were bound to the earth in eternal service to a force far older than any of them could comprehend. And as Marion's consciousness began to fade, a final whisper reached her ears, a voice like a distant echo from the very fabric of time itself. "You were always meant to be here." Marion's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she was still alive. The clearing had disappeared, replaced by a vast, endless void of darkness. The air around her was thick, suffocating, and she could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching her, following her every movement. She was no longer alone. The figures appeared, slowly at first, stepping from the dark corners of her mind, from the forgotten corners of the world. They were the lost ones, the souls that had been claimed by the hollow, those who had come seeking answers and never returned. Their forms were twisted, deformed by the centuries of torment they had endured. Faces she recognized, Luther, Elias, and Sophia were among them, their eyes hollow, their bodies pale and skeletal. They stared at her with expressions of sorrow and regret, but there was something else in their eyes. There was no escape. The woman in white appeared once again, her presence more powerful than ever. She was no longer just a ghostly figure, a haunting specter. She had become something more, something inhuman. Her eyes glowed with a cold, otherworldly light, and as she approached Marion, the very air seemed to freeze. "You are here now," the woman whispered, her voice like 1,000 mournful sighs. "You are one of us." Marion tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, her words caught in the air. Her mind was racing, struggling to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense, nothing except the song that echoed in the very heart of the hollow, the melody that had claimed her just as it had claimed all those before her. "You can't escape," the woman continued, her gaze locked onto Marion's, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. "Not now, not ever. You belong to the hollow now. Your soul is bound to its song. It will never release you." Tears burned at Marion's eyes, but she didn't fight it anymore. She couldn't. The weight of the truth had crushed her, broken her, and she understood now. The hollow wasn't just a place. It was a prison where the souls of the lost were bound forever, condemned to an endless cycle of torment. And now she was a part of that cycle. But as the dark emptiness closed in around her, she saw something, a flicker in the distance, a figure bathed in a soft golden light. For a moment she thought it might be a trick of her mind, a final vision before the hollow consumed her completely. But as it grew closer, she realized it was real. It was someone she had known, someone who had come before. The figure stepped into the light and Marion gasped. It was her brother, Elias. His face was still pale, still marked by the twisted horrors of the hollow, but his eyes were different. They were not hollow, not empty. They were filled with something Marion hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "I'm sorry, Marion," Elias said, his voice soft but full of sorrow. "I didn't know, I didn't understand, I couldn't fight it. But now I know, now I understand." Marion's heart swelled with emotion, and she reached out to him, her hands trembling. "Elias, you're still here." He nodded slowly, his gaze filled with pain. "I never left, Marion. Not really. We are all here, trapped in this place. All of us who came seeking answers. We thought we could escape it. We thought we could leave. But it's too powerful. It has us. All of us." Marion's heart broke, but she refused to give in to despair. She wouldn't. She couldn't. "I'll find a way out," she whispered, more to herself than to Elias. "I will break free. I won't stay here." Elias shook his head. "You can't. There is no escape, Marion. The hollow is too strong. The song, it's all-encompassing. It binds us all. There is no freedom from it." Marion's hands clenched into fists. The anger, the pain, the helplessness, all of it surged through her like a tide, drowning her in a wave of rage and sorrow. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite place. The woman in white took a step forward, her shadow stretching out like a dark veil. "It is time for you to join us, Marion. You will become one with the song. You will be part of us, forever." The world around Marion began to shift and warp, the darkness closing in on her like 1,000 suffocating hands. The voices of the lost souls rose around her, their cries echoing in her ears as they joined the song. The figures that surrounded her, twisted and broken, were no longer just shadows. They were the faces of the lost, the damned, the ones who had come before and were never allowed to leave. But as the song grew louder, a sudden realization flared in Marion's mind, and with it came a burst of defiance, something she had never felt before. She couldn't escape, not physically, but there was another way, a way to fight back. In the deepest recesses of her mind, she called upon the last remaining shreds of her will. She reached into the very core of her being, summoning every ounce of defiance she could find. She would not be another lost soul. She would not fade into the darkness. And with that she screamed. Her voice rang out like a bell, shattering the silence of the hollow. The song faltered for the briefest moment, and in that instant, Marion broke free. The world around her cracked. The darkness trembled. The woman in white screamed, a sound that shook the earth itself, as Marion pushed back against the song, against the force that had claimed her, and all those before her. But just as quickly as it had begun, the world went silent, and Marion Kincaid, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, was free. But the cost was something she had never anticipated. The hollow would never forget her. And as the last echoes of the song faded into the void, Marion realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun.